Very interesting pick for the first gospel too, because Matthew was known as a tax collector, which in that time, if you were a tax collector, then that means you basically betrayed your own people, the Jews, in order to like cheat them out of money so that you can become rich and also like hold this job for the Roman government, and the Romans were oppressing the Jews.
Right.
Yes.
So the fact that Jesus picked out Matthew to present his story is quite remarkable.
Right.
And it a lot of people
Very remarkable.
Yeah, very remarkable.
True.
And it speaks to the authenticity of Matthew too.
Yeah.
Because if somebody were just making up a story of Jesus and wanted to attach like a good name to it, they would not attach Matthew.
Right.
Mm.
Right. He's a very unlikely candidate who would not be very appealing, especially to a Jewish audience.
It's evident when you read the gospel that there is an audience. It is being written to a particular, not a specific people, but a general audience. And in Matthew's case, often he's referring to the Jewish people. He's trying to help the Jewish people see Jesus as their Messiah, as their king. He wants them to recognize that. And he does that in various ways. And one of them is he uses Old Testament prophecies and different quotations in order to point out to these Jewish people, hey, Jesus is the Messiah.
Yeah, I think this was the last episode we did where we talked about like the grand narrative of Scripture.
Right. Yeah.
And one of the things I pointed out then was that there are lots of prophecies in the Old Testament that look forward to Jesus. Matthew, more than the other four Gospels, brings that out.
Right.
If you read through Matthew, you'll see frequently he's like, thus it was fulfilled, thus Jesus fulfilled. And so he does look to the Old Testament a lot, to your point, because he knows that Jews are paying attention to the Old Testament. And Matthew is saying, look here, this is fulfilled in Jesus.
That's right.
So Matthew, in the writing style, we can conclude that he's being very intentional about how he writes and what he's writing.
Mm-hmm.
That's super important to remember. Thanks. So, Mark, who is Mark? And before we move on to Mark, is there anything else with Matthew that you guys think is important to keep in mind and to kind of put the book in context?
He's got a good name.
Well, okay, Mr. Matthew Tingblad.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Mark, what's going on here? Matthew is a pretty long book, and then Mark shows up, and it's really short. Who is he, and what's going on in his gospel account?
One of the things you read in Mark is immediately, or as soon as. I don't know. There are many ways, but he seems to have a real quick pace to what he's doing, what he talks about. So you're reading it and suddenly, whoop, another scene, whoop, So, Mark is not meant to be an actual disciple of Jesus, but he is someone who is associated with the apostles.
So he was not an apostle of Jesus.
No, not directly.
Right. So, for a long time, I, as a Christian, just kind of assumed that the gospel accounts were eyewitnesses, right? I mean, duh. But that's not the case.
Not in Mark's case.
Not in Mark's case. There's some speculation that a certain character, in the Gospels was Mark. I'm not going to get into details.
Yeah, there's that moment when you're talking about when Jesus was arrested.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mark's account, he's the only account of the gospel accounts that shows this detail. And that there was this little boy named John Mark or something who was seized by one of the Roman soldiers, and the soldier had grabbed his cloak, and then this boy kind of took his cloak off and ran away naked.
That's right. It's a fascinating little detail. And it goes to the fact that, if you're writing a gospel about Jesus, why would you include a detail that is so
embarrassing?
Right. So it goes to the authenticity of it.
Right.
I feel like, so if that was Mark,
right.
I feel kind of bad because clearly,
if it's the same Mark,
if that was Mark,
right.
is the name Mark even mentioned in that story, or is it just a guy?
No.
It's not. So
it's just
we don't even know who it is.
Yeah, it doesn't say his name.
It is a peculiar thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to dwell on this too much.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny because if that was Mark, I feel kind of bad for him because clearly Mark is like, I want to be in this story somehow. And this was the best story that you could come up with, like running out naked. Maybe that's why he doesn't identify the person.
Right.
Like, I want to say I'm in there without saying who I am in that story.
Well, yeah. we could talk about John and the way he refers to himself. But
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, we will. We'll get to that. So one of the other things that we made sure to have written in here. So he's not an actual like of the 12 apostles, right? But he is an associate of the apostle Peter and of Paul, which and of Barnabas, which you hinted at for a second. So maybe give us a little bit more on what's going on there.
Well, if we go on to another book in the New Testament, we talk about Acts.
Yeah.
And in Acts, you'll notice that Mark is involved there. And he's also involved in a bit of an embarrassing situation, too. But
yes,
Mark. Yeah. But he's apparently a growing character because, later on, anyway, he refers to in many places in the New Testament. So
we know that he had that association because of other scriptures.
Correct.
Okay.
And then also we I can't remember how sure we are, but I think it's pretty definite that we think that Peter was his source.
Yes.
For the gospel narrative.
I've heard that.
And so that I think gives us confidence that what he's writing is maybe not truly eyewitness, but it's almost like it's done by an eyewitness and he's retelling that story.
Okay, so what you're saying is there's in this idea that possibly some people call it Peter's gospel,
right?
That Mark was writing, and then over tradition or whatever, it's been remembered as Mark's gospel account since he wrote. Is that kind of what you're saying? But we're not sure of it. It's just kind of a conversation.
Well, authorship, I would still call it Mark's gospel, but I think the source for the narrative is
interesting. Okay, that's a good way to put it, maybe.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's interesting that so much of Peter's story shows up in Mark.
Yeah,
which is one of the clues too. But also the church tradition holds that Mark was an associate of Peter. It holds that Mark, of course, wrote this gospel, and so there's a lot going for it there. But one thing too, what you pointed out, that Mark likes to use the word immediately a lot, and he kind of rushes through stories. Mark is the shortest of the four gospels. And so if anyone wants to set out to read an entire gospel in a single sitting, Mark is a good place to start.
That's a really good
reading through Mark.
If you got a couple hours.
It's still lengthy, but people do it. People do it.